Welcome to the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast. Louisville attorney Jim Desmond has been handling injury cases related to traffic accidents for over 20 years. Jim will provide valuable information to help you and your family. He wants you to understand the important issues you need to know when it comes to handling car accidents and motorcycle wrecks in Kentucky. There's a lot riding on this, so let's get started. Friends, welcome to the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast featuring attorney Jim Desmond of the Desmond Law Office right here in Louisville, Kentucky. My name is Jim Ray. I'm a non-attorney spokesperson. And the reality is, the reason I say that is to let you know, look, I'm not a practitioner. I don't have any background in the law. Jim's the attorney, and when Jim is talking, he's the guy you want to really listen to. So I'm going to ask some questions as we get into this episode and really kind of depend on Jim to carry the ball here. It's his podcast. He knows the information. So I just want to let you know who this other guy is on the mic, just so you have some familiarity. Other than that, hey, Jim, welcome to episode 5, the guy. Congratulations.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. Hey, you know, in the last 4 episodes, we really kind of got into some specifics about different types of insurance coverage, different types of things to consider. But in this, you really kind of wanted to go a different direction.
Right. I wanted to go back and actually talk about taking those concepts from the first 4 episodes and kind of bringing them home, saying, you know, how do they actually, you know, interact? How do they play when it comes to a car accident? And we're going to do that in about, you know, a minute or so. I want to go to actually start with the concept that when an accident happens, where do we go, you know, minute by minute, so to speak. But the first part I always kind of stress to people, and this again goes back to those concepts in the first 4 episodes about uninsured, underinsured coverage, no fault coverage, no collision coverage, is that when a car accident happens, it's like a photograph is taken. Everything that's in that photograph stays there. You can't take anything out. You can't put anything in. So if you have a car accident, and back to those concepts in the beginning about uninsured and underinsured coverage, and you do or don't have that kind of coverage, it affects how we can do, you know, or how I can do more correctly, or how can I handle your car accident. I like to stress that because it's a step that, first of all, a consumer can take and make sure they're protected independent of everyone else, okay? To have the right kind of insurance no matter what, and plan for the possibility that a severe car accident might happen one day. We all think it's not going to, but hopefully, you know, we're ready if it does. And the other reason I like to stress that analogy with that, the idea that, you know, if it's a photograph, everything's in there, you got to get it in there before that accident ever happens, is because you see all these TV advertisers when it comes to personal injury attorneys, and they all want to say, well, I can do this for you, I can do that for you. Well, 80% of what we can do is determined before the car wreck ever happens. So if you don't have the right kind of car insurance, if you don't have, you know, the right type of coverage and protection, I don't care, you know, I don't care if you're F. Lee Bailey, okay? You're still going to be limited by what your client did before this accident ever occurred.
And specifically, you're coming back to talk about underinsured motorist coverage or uninsured motorist coverage, which is a policy or a rider on your current policy that you as the owner actually, you know, you pay for, you take along in case the other person either doesn't have insurance or doesn't have enough insurance to cover you. Is that correct?
Right, that's correct. And then I can tell you paid attention the first couple of episodes, Jim. But it's also more than just that. I mean, those are the 2 I stress because to me, those are the ones I deal with all the time where I'm sitting here kind of pulling my hair out saying, God, if only we had this on this policy, the case would go completely different. But the concept of having things, you know, before the accident happened, it still applies to the collision coverage, for example, is that, you know, you get hit, you drive a Mercedes and, you know, it's a $30,000+ car and it's hit by somebody who has no insurance. Well, if you don't have that collision coverage on your car, you're in trouble. Same thing with the rental car coverage. You know, you can decide to use that or not. I don't personally think it's worth it, but it's that same concept. You got to figure out ahead of time what is it you can really deal with and not deal with before the accident ever happens.
Because you can't really go back and add it after the fact.
Nope.
It doesn't work that way.
Right. Insurance companies, they go down to the minute. So I've seen clients try to do this, and it's always kind of a little humorous, but where they literally will have an accident, and they know they messed up, and they'll run over to the insurance agent, and of course it doesn't apply. It applies to everything that happens that next day. I think whenever I see my car, whenever I use my own car insurance and, you know, pull or add a policy, pull a car on and off a policy, I usually see 12:01 a.m. as the effective time.
Exactly.
That's usually what they do.
I mean, it's that specific. It's that precise. There's
Yes.
a lot riding on this, basically.
Right.
And they want to protect themselves.
Right. Because, I mean, let's face it, that's back to something we talked about in the first episodes. What's the job of an insurance company? It's to settle a claim and move on to the next one and settle it as cheaply as possible if they can, because they're in the business to make money. So,
Well,
but let's talk about car wrecks in general.
absolutely, jump in.
Well, what I was going to do this time is try to actually bring people through from day one, because that's where I kind of step in. The car accident happens, you're sitting here kind of shaking your head saying, what the heck do I do next? Okay. So the first step is usually you are at the scene. And if you are at the scene, do not call your attorney. Okay. I've had people do that. Don't call me. That sounds strange, but police officers don't like it. Ambulance personnel, they want to know that you're concentrating on, the situation at the scene and what you need to do injury-wise. I have taken calls from clients, but again, it's not my first suggestion.
I mean, they ought to take care of themselves first, right?
Right.
I mean, all of this stuff, like you said, there's a snapshot that's already been taken.
Right.
So make sure you take care of yourself. Make sure you and your passengers are safe, and all of this stuff is going to get taken care of. But the attorney shouldn't be the first call.
No, he shouldn't. And maybe that sounded too cynical on my part, but the first step is, cooperate with the police officer, do whatever you need to be safe, and also get your treatment you need. And we, attorneys, we kind of sweep up after the fact, and we can still do that. I always tell people this is one thing that is huge if I could get people to do it. If you're hurting to the point where you can't do it, or you need to take an ambulance to the hospital, then do it. But if you're not hurting that point, pull out your camera, okay? Most of us have cell phones with cameras in it. Pull it out. Take some pictures, okay? Right. The placement of the vehicles before they move, it's huge. Which lane the vehicles are in. All those things can come into play down the road, and you think, well, I shouldn't need that because, this other guy was at fault. Well, you can't take for granted the fact that he's at fault, he or she.
And once those cars have been moved, you can't really, go back and say, no, it was here, not there. A picture
is worth 1,000 words, but that's why that's why the second aspect is I tell you and you do legally need one in Kentucky, no, but I tell you to call a police officer, get a police report, because again, what you talked about when the cars are moved, I mean, these folks are trained, the police officers are trained to see, how an accident happened and make a determination as to what they think happened. Now, an insurance company is not bound to follow that determination, okay? They can say, we don't agree with the police officer, we think the fault rests this way. But it is very influential to have a police report saying, okay, the other guy turned in front of me. He didn't yield the right of way, whatever he might have done.
At least you've got a statement on the official record based on your understanding of what actually happened. Now, the other party may say something different,
right,
but at least you've got documentation that said, no, I said this.
Right.
The one thing that really, really surprised me is when we were talking about this, preparing for this, is that, again, police reports are not necessarily admissible in court, and that just seems so odd. Why is that here in Kentucky?
Well, because, if you think about it, and I don't get into the whole details, but they're hearsay. They're what somebody else said, okay, because the officer was not a witness to the accident. Now, the things that he did witness and he puts in the police report, those can come in. So
a skid mark on the road.
Right.
You can say there's a 30-foot skid mark right there.
I measured a skid mark that was 30 feet, and this is what, and exactly. But even if it's not admissible, you got to realize you're getting ready for court litigation from day one, but most cases don't go that way. So before
that surprises a lot of people, doesn't it? It's not what we see on TV.
Oh, well, no, the TV wants to make it sound totally different, yes.
Right, right.
But yes, most cases settle ahead of time. So my point on the police report is that you've got an independent person who's trained in investigating accidents saying the other guy's at fault. That's highly influential. So that's, again, why I like it. The other reason is it gives us a lot of information right off the bat where, for example, today I had to hire an investigator again because we're going to go back and try to find some video of this accident. Well, I had to go back to my client and they confirmed the date of the accident, the exact location, the time, all these things that would have been on a police report, that my investigator is going to need to try to track that down. So it's just a huge amount of information you can get. Is it fun to wait for the police officer to come? No. Is it crucial? No. Is it ideal to have a police report? Yes.
It does help.
Yes.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned, the information that you're going to try to, put into this or have in this police report. Is there something you can say that actually you want to be careful of? I mean, sometimes you don't want to necessarily say too much. I mean, that can be a risk as well. That's kind of a gray area, isn't it?
Maybe I don't know if I'm following your question. You don't want to ever admit fault at the scene of an accident. If that's what you're saying.
That's what I'm getting at.
If you can get the other guy to admit it, fantastic. Okay, but you really don't generally want to admit fault at the scene of an accident because, first of all, are you at fault? You may or may not be. You don't know exactly how the accident happened, or you may not. And anything you do say Okay, I mean, you're getting into some legal rules involving evidence I don't want to get into, but let's just say if you say to the police officer, well, I was 10 miles over the speed limit, and he notes that down. Okay, that's what you call an admissions against interest, and that can come into play down the road. Sure,
Okay.
that can be used against you.
Just kind of stick to the facts, more or less. And this is what happened. Yeah, I'm okay. Or actually, you may not even want to say I'm okay. You may just want to say, look, I'm going to go get checked out. Because if you report, hey, I wasn't injured, he's going to probably put that down too, or she's.
Well, they do, and they do that all the time and stuff. And it's one of those, again, I mean, I don't want someone to say they're injured if they're not, but in the same respect, you usually don't know. And what I have found, I mean, I always use myself as a little bit of an example, and I think I might have brought this up in the other episodes where I had a little Honda Civic that just got a bumper tap on a ramp,
Right.
and no damage, and I didn't bother doing a police report. I didn't bother making a claim. And I think I was 15 years younger, so it wasn't even then. But the bottom line is the next day I woke up and I felt that, So it's like at the scene, people, there's, your adrenaline's pumping. You don't know if you're hurting or not, okay? That's why I always tell people, go get checked out within the first 3 to 4 days after an accident. But the biggest thing I see with clients is that a lot of clients will say at the scene of the accident or the day of the accident, oh, they don't think they're hurt or they don't think, they're in trouble with anything. And then they go to sleep, and they wake up the next day, next couple of days, and all of a sudden they start hurting. And it's basically their body's finally saying, hey, look, something's up here. So
Right. But unfortunately, you made that statement, and that was put down on the police report potentially, and now you got to argue against that.
it doesn't help, yeah.
Yeah.
Because again, I mean, you got to realize, as I told one client the other day, I had a really nasty letter from an insurance company about low property damage, because they also try to say if the damage to the car is not much, then you shouldn't be hurt, okay? And so I sent it on to my clients, okay? And he called, he was really upset about it because he was hurt, and he said, I don't like somebody making an assumption like that. And I said, you got to realize I'm not worried about that part yet, but the reason I send that to you is I want you to know we've got an uphill battle from day one when dealing with insurance companies and all these presumptions against us. And so, like you just said, if you give them more, things to hang their hat on, all you're doing is cutting your feet out from underneath you.
Right. Well, okay, so now we're waiting for this police report to come, and I'll give you some information here in a little while, or I'll give the listeners some information about how they can get that. But, while you're doing that, you can actually open up 2 different claims, right? Or I can work with you to open up 2 different claims. So I could get my no-fault claim started, but I could also get my liability claim started. Is that correct?
That's correct, but let me go back for a second because I was thinking about it when you were asking that question. 2 things I kind of want to finish up a little bit on the police report, and especially the scene of the accident.
Right.
When you're at the scene of the accident, if there is a witness there, okay, then get that person's information, a name, an address, ideally a phone number, ideally all 3, okay, all 3 pieces of information. Keep it. Okay, so many of my clients will say, I gave that to the police officer, and the police officer may or may not note that on the report. The police officer sees it's a rear-end collision, doesn't think the witness information is necessary, and he's rushing to get to the next accident, okay? That can be huge. The other thing is, look around and see if there is any kind of video camera at the scene of the accident. We can come along on the back end, try to get it. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but I have had some success several times with obtaining that afterwards. To go back to what you were saying, okay, so we're waiting for a police report. So we haven't, in the typical accident, we don't have any information on the other driver because the police officer showed up and he said, I'll just get it all, and it's all in the police report. And you're waiting for a police report. Well, on average, they're pretty good about it, but let's say assume it's 3 to 5 days after an accident before you're going to get a police report.
The official report, right.
Yeah, it can be longer, it can be shorter, but that's the average. Back to your question, Jim, can you open up a claim with your insurance company? Sure, and you should. With your insurance company claim, it's going to be 2. It's going to be 1, collision coverage if you have it on your vehicle. Collision coverage is going to be designed to take care of your car repairs, okay, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. And 2, if you're going to get any medical treatment or did get medical treatment, is the no-fault or PIP coverage, okay? In Indiana, it's the MedPay coverage we talked about in the first episode.
But in Kentucky, no fault and PIP, or personal injury protection, that's the same thing. It's
Same
the
thing.
It means
Sorry
the
about
same
that,
thing.
yep.
Okay,
Yep.
just to be sure.
And that's all. And again, we all call that and legally it's called first party coverage. Okay, and then why is it first party? Well, you're the first party. You bought this insurance. When you open that claim, okay, a couple things. 1, they may want to take a statement from you. Well, it's your insurance company. I don't have a problem with if you do that. But 1, I will tell you not to guess anything they're asking you, and 2, I will tell you not to minimize your injuries because again, it's right after the accident. Who knows how much you're hurting or not?
Best to say I don't know,
Right.
or I'm not sure, or I'm
Right.
going to get checked out. If
Exactly, because again, it's one of those that, I mean, all the insurance companies want to pin you down as to your story from day one. Well, again, I mean, I've seen this 100 times. People are concentrating on a neck and back pain because that's very prominent, and they forget that, their knee's hurting and those type of things. So they don't bring it up, and it looks like, oh, well, was your knee really hurting, or are you just complaining about something 2 weeks later out of the blue? But your insurance company, you're going to want to get a claim number. You're going to want to find out the name of the adjuster assigned to it, and you're going to want their contact information, okay? Yeah.
And they provide that readily. I mean, that's
Sure.
the standard thing.
Sure, but you want to keep that information too because, okay, a couple things. Well, anytime you're dealing with any insurance company, you want to have the claim number. It makes it 20 times easier to track down who's handling the claim, okay? Second thing is, let's go back to the no-fault coverage. So you're saying, okay, I am hurt. I'm going to go to a physical therapist. I'm going to go to a chiropractor. They're going to want that information we just said. They're going to want the claim number. They're going to want the name of the adjuster assigned to it and their contact information. Because obviously, if they're going to create a bill, for your medical treatment, they're going to need to know where to send it, how much the coverage is, all these different type of things.
And it's just easier if they send it direct to the insurance company versus to you, and you got to move around and get it to the right people. Just let them work together, correct?
Right, right. Now, if you get the police report, then you open the claim with the other person's company. That's called the third-party claims, okay? And what is it? You're the third party. You're making a claim against somebody else's policy. Usually, the easier way I call it is, okay, they're the liability carrier. Why?
Sure.
They're potentially the one that's at fault, okay, or their driver more correctly. So same concept applies where get a claim number, their contact information. They're not going to pay any medical bills until they pay at the end. I need to be clear about that. Is liability carriers, everybody thinks, and this would be logical under the law, okay? This guy just sent you to the hospital, you got checked out, you're following up with your family doctor, whatever it might be. You would think, okay, well, he caused the accident, so he should have to pay my medical bills. That's not how it works, okay? A liability carrier will not pay any medical bills or any part of your pain and suffering claim until they can pay everything at the end. And obviously, they can't do that until they know you're done treating, nor do you want to do that so fast.
Right. So if you've got a broken bone or you've got, let's say, a neck problem or even something much more significant, it's going to take a while. You may have a series of surgeries. You may have some rehab that you have to go through. You may have a whole bunch of other things. So this case could literally stretch on for quite some time before that carrier actually writes that first check. And that's
Right,
kind of
the
what you're
liability
getting-
carrier,
yeah, that's
correct.
what you're kind of getting at.
Correct. That's the liability carrier we're talking about. But now see, that's again where I want to contrast it with the no-fault carrier, because the no-fault carrier, no-fault is, again, think of it as health insurance coverage up to $10,000 immediately for a car wreck in Kentucky. Okay, that's the easiest way to think of it. Yes, I am oversimplifying it. There's other elements to it, but that's the easiest way. Those carriers, on the other hand, if you went to your family doctor and you're set up for 10 physical therapy sessions, they're going to pay those sessions as their the records are received, as they're approved, not wait till the last one, not to wait to settle the whole thing at once.
Because, I mean, they've got a cap. They know their exposure is limited to, say, roughly $10,000, and they're going to process that and kind of get you on down the road a little bit, knowing that the third-party carrier is actually got the bigger hill to climb.
I don't think I agree with anything you just said.
Really? Okay.
Maybe I didn't fully understand
take
it.
it apart. Well, I'm just saying, we talked about the liability carrier not really wanting to pay until the very end, so they know exactly what their exposure is, whereas the PIP or the no-fault carrier, who's actually your insurance company, is going to go ahead and pay that first $10,000 just because, that's just the law. They know they're capped out.
It's just the law, but it's not a cap. It's not a question of voluntary or involuntary in either one. It's that the law says this is why, okay, everybody balks about no-fault coverage. They all say, okay, this is a bad thing, and it's not, okay? Go back to what we said in the first couple episodes. What's the concept behind no-fault, which is if you're hurt and the injury is related to the accident, you should be able to get the treatment you need. How do we do that? We give you immediate medical expense coverage, okay? Right. So the no-fault carrier basically has to pay those medical bills, and it's actually, they're allowed to accumulate them for 30 days and such, but let's say within the first 45 days after an accident, they should be paying your medical bills, okay? The liability carrier, on the other hand, it's a totally different situation where what's his job? His job is to, again, protect his driver who was at fault for the wreck. Well, how does he do that? He does that by paying the claim, if he can, okay, at the end. He does that by paying the claim all at once, okay? And think about why that would be the case. If you had a liability carrier that said, okay, fine, I agree, my guy rear-ended you, and you went to the family doctor, we're going to pay for these 10 physical therapy sessions. Well, all of a sudden, after all that, the doctor says, you know what, this guy needs surgery. That liability carrier really has already given his stamp of approval and said, hey, all this is related to the accident. He kind of he's stuck himself out there and owes the coverage for basically the surgery is what I'm saying.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep.
And that's the problem you have. So again, I think we went a little off track between the two of us, but the whole point is that you do want to open both claims. You always, and to go back to something in the beginning, you always want to know which company, we talked about this in the first couple episodes, which company you're dealing with. You got two different claim numbers because, again, they have different responsibilities. So your no-fault or PIP carrier and your MedPay carrier in Indiana, same concept. Their responsibility is to pay your medical bills if they're reasonable or related to the accident. In contrast, the liability carrier gets to say, hey, look, you got to show, for me to pay cent one, you got to show my guy was at fault, and I have to have enough insurance coverage to pay it, and I got to believe you got a good claim against me, or my guy more correctly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. But let me stir the pot here a little bit.
Okay.
Because early on when we started talking about the two claims, there was also this statement about the collision claim, not necessarily the liability, but the collision claim where I might use my own insurance.
Right.
Not for that first $10,000. I'm not talking about medical. I'm talking about property damage now.
Correct.
Walk me through that. I mean, there's an advantage to doing it that way, but you're kind of hoping that actually you win the case down the road and get reimbursed. But there are some advantages for attacking it that way, I guess.
Yes. I mean, and the first step, of course, back to what we said in the beginning, you have to have the collision coverage on your car. For example, I've got 3 cars, and one's new enough that I've got collision coverage, and the other 2 I don't, okay? So let's assume the newer one has the collision coverage.
Okay.
If I'm in an accident, there's nothing preventing me from saying, you know what, I'm not going to worry about the liability carrier, the other insurance company. I'm going to go ahead and use my collision coverage. I'm going to take this back to the dealer. I'm going to get it fixed, and then I'll deal with everything else down the road. The only downside is I get stuck with my deductible that I may or may not be able to recover from the other person down the road.
Because I made that decision.
Yeah, but it goes a lot quicker, and I can control it. The liability side, let's say I decide to wait 3 days and I get the other company online, okay? That's fine. They have a right to inspect it. They're going to inspect it. And they're going to ultimately, as long as they're at fault for the wreck, they're going to be responsible for the repairs. And I want to go back to that in a little more detail, but they're going to be responsible for the repairs, and you're not going to get stuck with your deductible. So it's really an issue of, can you afford your deductible, and how quickly do you want to get it going? Let's talk for a second, since you kind of led to that, 2 broad concepts dealing with property damage, okay? If the first question is always, is the car a total loss, okay? If the repair costs for that vehicle equal, and I'm going to guess because it's a 70 or 75%, I don't remember offhand, there's a statute on it, but 70 or 75% of what that car is worth, the fair market value, okay? The insurance company is required to total it out, okay? That's a total loss. And that means they owe you fair market value, what that car would have sold for allegedly the day before the accident, okay?
Right. So if I'm driving a 2010 whatever, it's not worth if I went out to buy a new model of that. It's the fair market of the car I'm actually driving.
Right. It's not replacement cost. And that's the part that's really lousy.
I think a lot of people get surprised by that.
Well, and that's the lousy part under the law. Let's use that example for a second. Okay, fine. You have a 2010 Honda, okay? It's got 80,000 miles on it. Everything we know about Honda says it should have another 100,000+ miles to go, right? Well, the insurance company says it's, only worth $7,000. You've got to, if that's a total loss, you still are forced to go buy a new car and spend $20,000 on something you didn't want to do. Is there a way around it? No. If first of all, if it equals that much in repairs, I had clients argue to me before and say we should try to argue they should have to fix it and all this other stuff. If a car has that much in repairs, if it's that much of a good impact, I'll tell you from practical experience, non-legal experience, get rid of the damn thing, okay? It's never going to be quite the same, okay? If the car can be repaired, fine, no issues. But what I will tell you is either whether it's your insurance company or their insurance company, it's you can take it wherever you want to take it, okay? Certain insurance companies will give you a little bit of an advantage and say, hey, well, if you take it to this shop, we have it approved there and we can make it go faster or give you a longer warranty on the repairs. And that's fine if you want to do it that way. They can, as a general rule, this comes up a lot. They can use used parts on the car, and as long as it's older than a year, as long as the car is older than a year, they can use used parts. Usually doesn't make a difference. The part that I like to stress to my clients that I don't think happens is you want a good body shop manager, okay? Because one, if there's a need for a new part, he's going to fight for it, okay? He's going to say, no, we really don't want to put a used part on it for this reason. And two, something I see all the time about when cars are going to be fixed. If I take my car over to Oxmoor Collision Center, I'll get one estimate. If the insurance company takes it over there, they get a lower estimate because a lot of times they can argue to them and say, well, you're charging me to pull and replace this bumper when in fact all we got to do is cover it up so we can paint over, this or that or, those type of things. A good body shop manager should be talking to that insurance company and figuring out whether or not they can work off that repair. Okay, because what happens, again, let's say the body shop comes up with a $3,000 estimate and the insurance company says we only want to pay $2,200. Well, that body shop manager should have that adjuster on the phone and saying, okay, no, this is why we have the difference, and they should be coming basically to a compromise because, again, he wants the business too.
And he can actually be an advocate for you
Yes.
in that regard.
Right, and I'm glad you brought that point up. This is a little side note, but it's worth mentioning. When something happens mechanically to the car after the accident, and I hear this a lot from clients, you all of a sudden have a radiator that goes out or you hear a transmission's going to go out, that's really hard to relate to a wreck, okay? The only way you have a chance to relate it is back to what you just said about advocacy. You have to have a body shop person or a mechanic saying the force of this impact probably caused this issue, and that's why it's related to the accident. If you don't have that, then basically we don't have a leg to stand on.
Right. So your average shade tree mechanic may not be as credible as someone that's got a shop that's been set up for a number of years. The insurance company's probably dealt with them in the past. I mean, there's a reputation there that they're also going to probably.
That does help. I'm not going to say it doesn't.
hurt.
You can when you talk to insurance adjusters, you see that sometimes where they know certain shops and they can even say, look, go ahead and send me up the estimate, and they can send it up directly or the photos. The other thing that comes up is what we call supplemental repairs. Okay, well, two things. Let's go back to you got a $2,200 estimate. If they send you a check, okay, for that, that's fine. You want to make sure it doesn't, of course, list medical bills or something else or pain and suffering on there or something. But you're going to pretty much turn that check over to the body shop. But they usually will send it to you directly. And then two, they have a thing called supplemental repairs. And what they're saying is, okay, they pulled the bumper, they found another $600 worth of damage. That body shop may get hold of them and issue a supplemental estimate saying there's another $600. And again, that insurance company usually will just issue a second check for the other $600 and send it on directly to them.
We couldn't see that until we actually got into it, and
Right.
and that happens.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Friends, let me do this. This is a complicated process, and there are a number of other aspects to this that I know we want to jump into. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back in episode 6 here in 2 weeks and really continue to build out this whole process to give you a really good, firm understanding of some of these general process issues and the things that are important to pay attention to, and ultimately kind of the reason why you want to have a good, well-qualified, highly experienced attorney on your side to help shepherd you through this process. For now, let's go ahead and transition to something that we do each podcast episode, and it's called So This Happened This Week. What we're trying to do in this segment of today's podcast is to really kind of switch gears with you a little bit and just talk about something that Jim saw sometime this week or the previous week, and kind of give you an idea of things that not necessarily related to what we've talked about so far, but to give you another idea of what Jim thinks about the way he handles the clients, the way he handles the cases. Jim, let's talk about the dreaded health insurance lien. You want to jump into that today? And this is kind of a story you were telling me before we got started.
I wasn't telling you. I was venting. I was upset with them.
I was being kind.
I don't like health insurance companies. I used to work for them. So, well, the point for consumers to understand is, again, you got to stop if let's say you do think you're going to handle your own claim, okay? Or even if you have an attorney involved, you still have to stop and ask the question, who's paying my medical bills? And I mean every single medical bill you're dealing with, okay? So, for example, in this situation, this was a claim I had gotten settled. Luckily, we had no-fault coverage remaining. So we had $10,000 in coverage, and the medical bills, I think, for the client were like $5,300, okay?
So you didn't use it all up.
Right. So, and I did not receive, this insurance company says, oh, we sent you this notice before the settlement. I'm like, no, you didn't. Okay. But the short story is they recently sent me a second notice saying, we've got this claim. It was for, it was one medical bill, and I think it was a total of $300 and some odd dollars is what they paid out for it. Okay. And of course, it's a nasty notice saying we want it back, and we're going to go after my client, for it and everything else. The point being, again, now in that case, it's fine. I know what to do, which is in that case, I'm going to contact the no-fault carrier, which I did. I sent it up to them. I said, per the statute, I can direct payment, and I'm telling you to pay this lien, and there won't be an issue. So my client won't be faced with anything. I won't have to deal with any of it or anything like that. But the problem I have with health insurance companies in general, and this is what people have to face as a consumer, is this is a case that's 6 months old, okay? I should say 6 months old from the time we settled it. The actual accident.
The book on this has been closed for 6 months.
Correct. And the actual accident would have been 18 months ago, okay? So you have, and I've kind of chewed the insurance company out when I responded because I said, look, I can tell what happened, which is, this is December, this is the end of the year, and you guys finally started going through some things you should go through and say, oh, we didn't do anything we were supposed to do on this. Well, my point to the client is that's why, again, you need to know whether an attorney has your case or whether you're handling it yourself, whether or not all your medical bills have been paid and who they've been paid by. That's why, for example, with my clients, I ask usually for a health insurance card or even if it's Medicare, I ask for that too. And a lot of times I just want to get a letter in the file, if nothing else, saying that they didn't pay anything related to it. Because, again, client can settle a case, be done with this thing, and think it's all behind him, and all of a sudden you get this notice, and boom, you're now all of a sudden paying another $200 or $300 out that you didn't expect or more.
Right.
So.
And realistically, again, you've signed the settlement offer. I mean, you've agreed to all that. You can't go back to the other party
Correct.
And ask for more money. So, I mean, this is really a bad situation when it happens, but it's probably not all that uncommon.
Right. And actually, it's funny, I'm going to bring up another analogy from before. Yep. I don't know if Jim's probably going to tell me I brought this one up before, but if you sign a release from a liability carrier, I use this example every time, but it makes a point. I tell my clients as they're getting ready to sign that check and sign that release that if you go back to the doctor tomorrow and he says you're going to go blind in your right eye because of the accident, and it doesn't matter how severe it is or when it's discovered, you can't recover anything further. And that was the point Jim just made. And so, again, you got to have all your T's crossed and your I's dotted before the accident happened because, let's face it, the bottom line is, and excuse my French, but accidents are a pain in the ass. You want to put them behind you, and the last thing you want to do is be dealing with it several years after you think it's done.
Right. And again, the value of having an experienced, seasoned attorney who knows how to do this is invaluable at this point. We need to say that realistically, all these facts are specific to one particular case, and really the only reason you were able to do that is because in this particular case, you still had no-fault benefits that had not been fully exhausted. So again, that case may not be exactly the same as the case you're dealing with directly, and it may not be something that your neighbor, had in their last car wreck. All of this stuff is fact specific. So again, when you hear other people giving you these, well, yeah, you should call this person, and yeah, my aunt had the same thing, and she got $1 million. That stuff really comes back to the fact that it depends on the issues related to your specific case.
Right, absolutely. And that's why I tell people, I say, look, just pick up the phone and call me. Let's go through it for 10 minutes because it's a lot easier. Because that's the whole thing about the law that people don't understand until you go to law school, which is the law is fact specific. Before you go to law school, you think that there's a bunch of laws out there and that you just got to know what they are. No, those laws have to be applied to the facts each time. And so what you were just saying, as a matter of fact, about each case being different, that goes back to the thing we started this whole podcast about this time, which is, again, that photograph and what's in that photograph determines a lot ahead of time. Again, as I said before, and I love to shove this analogy down everybody's throat. Sorry about it. If you lose your left arm in a car wreck and it's a 1980 Chevette is the car that hits you, we're in trouble. If, on the other hand, it's a big semi-tractor trailer, there's probably more than enough insurance coverage. We'll be fine. We'll be able to take care of you. So it's all fact-specific, even though the injury can be the same, and such like that.
Jim, as we wrap up, I want to come back to one thing that we did promise in the earlier part of the earlier part of the episode, is that we were going to tell them how to find or how to go ahead and get that police report. And really, here in Louisville or here in Kentucky, there's two ways that we would particularly do it, especially in Jefferson County. You could go to, I guess it's a website called Buy Crash. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, that's what I use most of the time. As a matter of fact, when I have you on the phone, usually with a client, I'll tell them, again, why don't you text me that little a picture of that little card the police officer gave you, and it'll have a report number on there. And I'll use buycrash.com, but anybody can use it to pull up a police report. Now, it costs $10. You can print it up off the internet. It's fantastic. So then you've got this copy, and you can fax it up to these insurance companies when you're dealing with them. It makes it a whole lot easier.
It's fast.
It is. It's fast. But the one little warning I will give you, too, is that you have to be able to, if you have your name, for example, a little bit different, if it's hard to spell or something else, there's a lot of reasons it won't pull it up. It's a typical computer program.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So you may have to work at it a little bit sometimes to do it. The other way is you can go down to, like, for example, Louisville Metro. The police department down there is 701 West Ormsby. And you can go down there and pay for the police report and get it that way. I think it's $5 that way. I just find it much more convenient to use buycrash.com. Either way, I tell clients when they call me on the phone, I like to get the police report. I don't mind doing it. It costs me $10. I'll do it as a courtesy.
Right.
But it does help immensely because let's say somebody's called me and says, I don't think I was at fault. And sometimes I'll just tell them, read me, for example, the narrative that the cop wrote, okay, the police officer more correctly, wrote, because that tells me a lot. And we can talk about, whether we think there's going to be a fault issue or not. So it's very quick, very informative. It's a nice way to kind of get things going very fast.
Perfect. And friends, if you're listening to this podcast, I will, in the show notes, it'll show up on attorneydesmond.com. If you want to go to the podcast page and look for episode number 5, this is episode 5, you'll see these companies, these websites listed in the bottom of the show notes if you go there. So again, hey, Jim, thanks a lot for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been a great episode. And again, in episode 6, coming up in about 2 weeks, we'll come back to this process and unpack some more of these issues and things people need to think about. But again, episode 5's in the can. I just want to say thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you again, Jim. Take care.
Take care. That's it for this episode of the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast. Jim Desmond will be back in 2 weeks to provide information you need to know related to car accidents and motorcycle wrecks in Kentucky. Until then, check out attorneydesmond.com. You can also follow him on Facebook at Attorney James Desmond. Drive safely and please remember to buckle up.